Okay, so today we are diving headfirst into some pretty dark stuff.
Yeah.
Um, the Manson family.
Yeah. Not exactly a lighthearted topic.
Definitely not. And to guide our descent into this, this abyss, I guess, we're using the Wikipedia entry on the Manson family.
Right. And it's important right off the bat to acknowledge just how horrific the Tate LaBianca murders were and truly twisted ideologies that fueled all of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Our goal here, though, isn't to sensationalize or shock anyone. It's to break it all down, to try to really understand the facts, the events, the people.
Absolutely. And our listeners, they come to us because they want to learn and they want to get a good grasp on these complex topics quickly but thoroughly.
Right.
So this deep dive is structured to do just that, to give everyone a comprehensive but manageable understanding of this dark period, pulling directly from the information we have. So let's just try to unpack this. How did this family even form in the first place?
Late 1960s California, a time of so much upheaval, right? So much change. And into this kind of environment steps Charles Manson. His mugshot from 68, it gives you a glimpse of the man at the center of it all. But the group itself, it's so hard to categorize.
Yeah. Is it a sect?
Yeah.
A criminal group? Are they hippies?
They've been called all of that, but also racists, Satanists, psychopaths, murderers. It's this truly disturbing mix.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And our source says they had around 100 followers at their peak.
Yeah.
And their lifestyle. It's this crazy combination of, unconventional living and heavy drug use, like benzodrine, amphetamine, LSD. You can only imagine what that environment must have been like.
And what's particularly unsettling is the backgrounds of these followers. So many of them were young women from middle-class families, initially drawn to that hippie culture, that ideal of communal living. But then Manson, he twisted those ideals, gradually radicalizing them, turning them towards this unimaginable violence.
What were they looking for? What void was he filling? It's hard to even fathom.
And the result, of course, as the Wikipedia entry makes clear: murders, robberies, assaults. Manson and a core group, they were convicted of 9 murders in Los Angeles, all in the summer of '69.
9 lives lost.
Gary Hinman. Then there was Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, along with 4 others at that house on Cielo Drive. Then Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. And Donald Shea, they called him Shorty.
Wow. Just hearing those names.
It's just brutal. And then there's even mention of another potential victim, a 10th victim.
Right.
Saladin Nader. The attack was stopped because one of the family members, I guess, was horrified by the plan.
Oh, wow. It makes you wonder how many other tragedies were just barely avoided.
Absolutely. The Wikipedia entry also gives us some insight into Manson's past. You wouldn't believe this, but he learned to play guitar in prison from Alvin Karpis, the bank robber.
Wow, what a strange pairing.
Right. Think about that connection. A would-be guru learning from a career criminal. It's bizarre. After Manson was released in '67, he ended up in San Francisco and then Berkeley, living basically as a vagrant. That's where he met Mary Brunner. He moved in with her. And then almost immediately, he started inviting all these other women to live with them against her will. Pretty soon, he had 18 women living in this small apartment. It's clear his need for control started early.
It's really disturbing to see those early signs of his dominance, I guess. So then, during the Summer of Love, this darkness starts to grow, right? The Wikipedia entry talks about him becoming this kind of guru figure in San Francisco, attracting these initial followers, La Familia Manson, mostly women too. He must have been offering them something they desperately needed, right? Like sense of belonging or purpose?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but it's clear they felt drawn to him. And pretty quickly, they transitioned to a nomadic lifestyle. They got a customized school bus and started traveling all over, up to Washington State, then down to Los Angeles, into Mexico and the Southwest, eventually ending up back in the Los Angeles area.
So they're in Topanga, Malibu, Venice Beach.
Exactly. They were isolating themselves, creating their own little world, separate from everything.
And right in the middle of all this chaos, Manson and Mary Brunner have a son, Valentine Michael. They called him Pooh Bear.
Right.
It's, kind of jarring to think about that nickname, Pooh Bear, against the backdrop of all the darkness that's coming.
It really is. And can get this. The Wikipedia entry even says that the actor Al Lewis, at least initially, thought Manson was a good guy.
Wow.
It really highlights Manson's ability to manipulate people, to put on a show. I mean, how many others were fooled by him at first?
It's a scary thought. Shifting gears a bit, the deep dive also talks about Manson's weird connection with Dennis Wilson, the drummer of the Beach Boys. What a strange, strange intersection.
Totally. So, mid-1968, Wilson picks up a couple of female hitchhikers, and according to Wikipedia, these women are completely obsessed with Charlie Manson. They're calling him the Wizard. I mean, that alone probably would have been enough for me. But it piqued Wilson's interest. And in a way, he invited this darkness right into his life.
Yeah. And their first encounter is pretty surreal. Manson shows up at Wilson's place in Malibu at 3 in the morning. And he kneels down and kisses Wilson's shoes. The Wikipedia entry says there were like a dozen other people already in the house, most of them women. I mean, it sounds like a scene from a bad movie.
Yeah, it's pretty out there. But Manson and his followers basically embed themselves in Wilson's life. Manson even says he recorded a bunch of songs in Wilson's brother's studio. Imagine that. The man who would become notorious for these horrific murders trying to make it in the music industry.
Right. The Beach Boys, though, they say that those recordings didn't happen. Or at least not with just Dennis.
Right. They claim Carl and Brian were the actual producers.
Yeah.
But there's a different side to that story. Yeah. This engineer, Stephen Desper, he says the recordings actually did happen. And he even said Manson was quite good musically. It's another piece of the puzzle, right? It's like Manson was this failed musician, but he had this messianic complex, and he was undeniably charismatic.
Definitely. Okay. So after that bizarre interlude with Dennis Wilson, the family moves to Spahn Ranch, right? This is in August of '68. It's this place with all this Hollywood history, but it's about to become a haven for something truly evil.
Yeah. And this move happened because Wilson's manager basically kicked the family out.
Spahn Ranch, with its history as a movie set for Westerns, it's this eerie backdrop to everything that's about to happen.
Right. Family members, they start working at the ranch, doing all sorts of things. But the Wikipedia entry also reveals just how controlling Manson was, especially over the women. It's disturbing.
It's truly awful.
Yeah.
Manson basically forced the women to have sex with the owner of the ranch as a form of rent. It's just depraved.
It's awful. And it was at Spahn Ranch that Charles Tex Watson joined the group, you know, a college dropout from Texas.
Right. He would eventually become Manson's enforcer.
Yeah. And then, in November of '68, the family retreats even further. They move to these two abandoned ranches in Death Valley, Myers and Barker. The desert becomes their sanctuary, a place where Manson's influence could grow unchecked.
Okay, so Myers Ranch, that belonged to the grandmother of one of Manson's new recruits. And then Barker Ranch, the way they got a foothold there,
Yeah.
it's kind of dark in a funny way.
Yeah, it's crazy. Manson basically gave the owner, this old guy, one of the Beach Boys' gold records. He pretended that a musician in the group just needed a quiet place to work.
Wow. So he's using this fleeting connection he had to the mainstream world to basically disappear even from there.
Exactly. It's really quite chilling.
Back at Spahn Ranch, though, something happened that seems to have really cemented Manson's warped worldview. He and Watson are hanging out with someone who plays them. The White Album, right? The Beatles album. It had just come out.
Right.
Seems like a pretty normal thing, but it had devastating consequences.
That album became an obsession for Manson. And it's important to remember, as the Wikipedia entry points out, that Manson already had this deep-seated belief that racial tensions were going to boil over, that there was going to be this huge black rebellion in American cities. I mean, he was seeing the world through this really distorted lens.
Yeah, and he saw the assassination of Martin Luther King as proof of this upcoming conflict. And then somehow he took the Beatles, you know, this band all about peace and love, and turned their music into like a soundtrack for his apocalyptic vision.
Exactly. And the Wikipedia entry talks about this New Year's Eve gathering at Myers Ranch. That's where Manson basically reveals his interpretation of the White Album. He tells the family that the Beatles are predicting the same upheaval he's been talking about. It's like he's validating his craziness by connecting it to their music.
And this is where his helter-skelter ideology takes hold. Manson started seeing himself and his family as key players in this upcoming race war. They're going to come out on top after all the chaos. I mean, it's delusional.
Yeah. And then in early January of '69, they moved to this canary yellow house in Canoga Park. They called it the Yellow Submarine, which is obviously another Beatles reference. According to Wikipedia entry, the idea was to basically hide from the outside world, to prepare for this so-called apocalypse.
So they're withdrawing from reality. They're living in this fantasy world.
Right, and get this. In February of 69, Manson has this vision. They're going to make an album, like the Beatles, but with all these hidden messages that will somehow spark this chaos he's been predicting. Like, he wants to be the puppet master of society's collapse.
Wow. So back at this house in Canoga Park, they're busy prepping, right? They're fixing up vehicles, they're studying maps of the desert, figuring out escape routes, and yeah, they're working on Manson's music. The Wikipedia entry says there was this palpable anticipation. The women are cooking, cleaning, getting everything ready for Terry Melcher to come visit and listen to their music. They actually believe this music is going to trigger the end of the world.
And then, of course, Melcher never shows up.
Right. It must have been a huge blow to Manson's ego.
Yeah.
This rejection from the music industry, specifically from Melcher, who used to live at that house on Cielo Drive. It probably fueled his resentment, his anger. And then in March of 69, he shows up at a 1050 Cielo Drive uninvited. I mean, that's a pretty big red flag.
Definitely. So March 23rd, 1969, Manson goes to that house in Beverly Hills. He knows it as Melcher's old place, but Rudy Altobelli owns it now, and Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski have been living there since February. It's this awful twist of fate. Wrong house, wrong time.
Absolutely, and the Wikipedia entry goes into detail about Manson's visit. He meets this photographer, Shiroka Tommy, a friend of Kate's. He's there taking pictures of her before she goes to Rome. Just imagine that scene, this normal, everyday moment, interrupted by the person who's going to bring so much violence and pain.
Yeah, it's chilling. Hatami asks Manson what he wants. Manson says he's looking for Melcher. Hatami tells him Polanski lives there now. Manson leaves. But Hatami feels uneasy and follows him out to the sidewalk. Then Sharon Tate comes to the door and asks what's going on. It's such a brief, ordinary interaction, but knowing what's going to happen, it's just loaded with this terrible sense of dread.
Right, and Hatami just tells Tate that some guy was looking for someone, and they both watch Manson walk away without saying anything. Then Rudy Altobelli sees Manson too and asks him what he's doing there.
Again, Manson asks for Melcher, and Altobelli doesn't know Melcher's new address, so he lies and says Melcher moved to Malibu.
So Altobelli tells Manson to leave, to stop bothering his tenants. Manson leaves, and the next day Altobelli and Tate go to Rome. You have to wonder if that visit, that rejection, if it stuck with Manson,
It's possible. It definitely seems like that location, that house, it became fixated in his mind.
Yeah. It's frightening how seemingly insignificant events can lead to such horrific outcomes. So the Wikipedia entry then goes into the crimes themselves, starting with the shooting of Bernard Latsopapa Crow in June of 69. Things are starting to escalate.
Yeah, Manson at this point is completely consumed by his helter-skelter delusion. He tells the family they have to show black people how it's all going to start. So he tells Watson to get money from this drug dealer, Bernard Crow. Supposedly it's for the family, but it's all part of his twisted plan.
And Crow, he threatens everyone at Spahn Ranch. And then, on July 1st, 1969, Manson shoots Crow at his apartment.
Amazingly, Crow survives.
So Manson believes he killed him. The paranoia within the family must have been intense.
It must have been. And this belief is reinforced by a news report about a Black Panther who was found dead in Los Angeles. Crow wasn't a panther, but Manson is convinced it's retaliation. The paranoia at Spahn Ranch goes through the roof. They're doing armed patrols, getting ready for this race war that only exists in Manson's head.
And, unbelievably, Manson is arrested for the shooting, but then released on bail. The bail money came from Gary Hinman. And, just weeks later, Hinman becomes another victim.
It's terrifying. The system completely failed to stop him.
Yeah. July 25th, 1969,
Yeah.
the murder of Gary Hinman. Manson sends Bobby Beausoleil, Mary Brunner, and Susan Atkins to Hinman's house. They're demanding money that Manson thinks Hinman inherited, but it's not true. They use a bad drug deal as an excuse.
What follows is this horrific hostage situation that lasts for days. The Wikipedia entry describes it in detail. Manson himself shows up at some point and cuts off Hinman's ear with a knife. Just a truly cruel, sadistic act.
Wow.
Then, apparently on Manson's orders, Beausoleil stabs Hinman to death. And then, to try and pit it on the Black Panthers, they write "Political Piggy" on the wall in Hinman's blood and draw a panther paw. It's this desperate, pathetic attempt to start the race war, the helter-skelter that Manson is so obsessed with.
And then, on August 6th, Beausoleil is arrested. He's driving Hinman's car, and they find the murder weapon inside. 2 days later, back at Spahn Ranch, Manson makes his chilling declaration. Now is the time for helter-skelter. I mean, it's like he flipped the switch.
And then, the night of August 8th into the morning of the 9th, 1969, the horror at 150 Cielo Drive. It's unimaginable. Manson orders Watson to take Atkins, Kasabian, and Krenwinkel back to that house where Melcher used to live. His instructions to totally destroy everyone in it, as gruesome as you can.
It's just pure evil.
He tells the women to do everything Watson says, and inside that house are Sharon Tate, who's 8 months pregnant, Jay Sebring, Wojciech Frykowski, and Abigail Folger. Roman Polanski is in London working on a film. He has no idea what's happening.
That's just awful.
The Wikipedia entry lays it all out, step by step. They get to the house in Watson's car. He cuts the phone line. They climb over the fence. Their first victim is this 18-year-old kid, Stephen Parent. He was just visiting the caretaker. They shoot him dead in his car, just a completely innocent bystander.
Wow. They push Parent's car further up the driveway, and then Watson gets inside the house. Kasabian stays outside as a lookout. They find Frykowski sleeping on the couch, and when he wakes up, Watson's pointing a gun at him.
They tie Frykowski up. Then they find Folger and Tate with Sebring. They force everyone into the living room.
Oh, man.
And then Sebring pleads with them to spare Tate because she's pregnant. Watson lets her sit down, but when Sebring tries to fight back, tries to grab Watson's gun, Watson shoots him and then beats him brutally. Folger gives them all the money she has, but it's clear that money isn't the motive here. It's something much darker.
It's just senseless violence.
Yeah. They tie everyone up, and then it all explodes. Watson tells Atkins to kill Frykowski, and there's this struggle, this fight for his life. Frykowski is stabbed over and over, then shot, then beaten with the gun. Folger manages to break free and run outside screaming for help, but Krenwinkel and Watson chase her down and stab her repeatedly in the garden. 28 times. It's horrifying.
Wow.
Frykowski, he somehow crawls outside too, and he makes eye contact with Kasabian for a brief moment. Then Watson comes out and stabs him again and again. 51 times. It's just brutal. Folger somehow manages to get up and walk toward the pool before collapsing.
So Kasabian sees all this happening. She's outside, going to the entry. She almost runs away, but then changes her mind.
Right. And then Tate, who's still tied to Sebring, she tries to get away, but Atkins and Krenwinkel catch her, and Watson stabs her over and over, 16 times. And then in this final depraved act, Atkins writes "pig" on the front door using Tate's blood. The Wikipedia entry actually calls it a ritualistic murder.
Wow. And then the very next night, the horror continues, August 9th going into August 10th. This time, 6 family members go out, and Manson goes with them. It seems like he was unhappy with how noisy and inefficient the murders at Cielo Drive were. He wants to teach them how to do it right. His need for control is just absolute.
And they drive around for hours looking for a target. Finally, they end up at the home of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. They'd been to a party in the neighborhood before, and Manson goes into the house himself. He wakes Leno up at gunpoint.
Wow.
He makes Leno and Rosemary go into their bedroom. And then Watson, following Manson's orders, covers their heads with pillowcases and ties them up with a telephone cord. Then Manson leaves. He sends Krenwinkel and Van Houten in to kill them.
It's chilling. He's orchestrating these murders even if he's not the one committing them.
Right. Watson takes Leno back into the living room and stabs him a bunch of times. Then he hears noises from the bedroom and goes back in. He finds Rosemary fighting Krenwinkel and Van Houten. She has a lamp tied around her neck. Watson joins in and stabs her over and over.
It's just barbaric.
Watson goes back to Leno and stabs him more till he's dead. Then he carves the word "war" onto Leno's stomach. In the bedroom, Rosemary has been stabbed 41 times. Krenwinkel uses Leno's blood to write "Rise" and "Death to the Pigs" on the walls and "Helter Skelter" on the refrigerator. They're making a statement. They're aligning themselves with Manson's insane vision.
Wow. And then, as if that wasn't enough, the Wikipedia entry says Krenwinkel stabs Leno's body with a fork, leaving it sticking out of him, and puts a knife in his throat.
It's just gratuitous violence. They go back to Spawn Ranch. That night, Manson, Atkins, and Kasabian try to commit another murder, but luckily their plan falls apart.
And then there's the murder of Donald Shorty Shea, the ranch caretaker. Manson was convicted of that, too. But we don't know the exact date it happened. His body was found years later.
Right. Steve Grogan helped the police find Shea's body. Manson had him and Bruce Davis kill Shea because he thought Shea was trying to get the family kicked off the ranch.
And there were rumors that Manson thought Shea knew about the Tate and LaBianca murders, too. Grogan and Davis were convicted, and so was Manson, because he was the one who ordered it. It shows just how much control he had, even over people who didn't take part in the most well-known killings.
Right. And then the Wikipedia entry shifts to the legal aftermath. They were already investigating the family for Hinman's murder. But then Susan Atkins starts bragging in jail about the Tate and LaBianca murders. She tells another inmate who reports it. And that's what really cracks the case open.
Wow. So her arrogance is what leads to their downfall.
Exactly.
So they arrest everyone, and the family basically dissolves. Atkins is convicted and sentenced to life in prison. By December 1st, 1969, it's pretty much over.
Right. Watson, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten all get life sentences, too. Linda Kasabian, she gets immunity for testifying against Manson and the others. She was really horrified by what the family had done, and she had actually run away from Spahn Ranch before all that. And another woman who lived at the ranch, Barbara Hoyt, she testified against them, too. Manson, even though he wasn't physically present for any of the murders, he's convicted in January 1971. He gets the death penalty.
Wow.
But then California gets rid of the death penalty, and Manson's sentence gets changed to life in prison.
Okay.
The Wikipedia entry describes Manson's behavior during the trial. He was super disruptive, trying to make it into this big spectacle. The district attorney, Vincent Bugliosi, he even talked about how Manson's voice would change when he was on the stand, like he was playing different characters. It's really creepy.
Yeah.
And of course, some of the things Manson said during the trial, they became infamous, you know?
Yeah.
The Wikipedia entry even mentions that one quote where he says, "The followers did everything out of love for their brothers." I mean, it's just a total distortion of the word love.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And the last part of the entry talks about what happened to everyone.
Yeah.
Manson died in prison in 2017. Watson found religion. He became a minister, wrote some books, got married. Atkins died in prison in 2009. They denied her parole. Krenwinkel is still in prison, living a pretty solitary life, I guess. Kasabian passed away in January of 2023. She lived with the weight of those events for her whole life.
This is a heavy burden to carry.
For sure. And Sandra Good, she was in prison for trying to communicate with Manson in prison. Then she moved to be near the prison after she was released.
Wow.
Grogan was paroled in exchange for helping to locate Shay's body. Davis is still in prison. He's been denied parole over and over. And then there's Van Houten. She was finally granted parole in 2023.
And Bobby Beausoleil, he's still in prison for Hinman's murder.
Wow. And then there's Lynette Fromay, the one who tried to assassinate President Ford. She got out of prison in 2009. The Manson family's influence, it stretched far and wide.
It did. And, this deep dive we did, based on the Wikipedia entry, it really paints this horrific picture. The rise of Manson, the way he manipulated people, this insane helter-skelter philosophy, and then these brutal acts of violence and the aftermath with all the trials and the different paths everyone took. It's a pretty bleak ending to this dark chapter.
Sure. And hopefully this exploration we did, putting together all these pieces of information, hopefully give everyone listening a better understanding of what happened.
It's a tough story to hear, for sure, but it's important. And, thinking about the backgrounds of these family members, so many of them came from seemingly normal families, it makes you wonder about the power that someone like Manson could have. What was it about him that made him so attractive to these people? What vulnerabilities was he exploiting?
It's a really unsettling question to consider. And, thinking about the social context of the time, the late 60s, all the change, the unrest, it makes you wonder how that period contributed to the rise of someone like Charles Manson and the allure of that family he created. It's a dark reflection on some hard truths about us as a society. And if anyone listening wants to go deeper into this, we definitely encourage you to check out the Wikipedia entry. There's a lot more there.